Our message this morning is It's Time. I want to do a little survey here of people. I need your help and cooperation in this. How many of you here are actually wearing a wristwatch? Hold up your arms there if you got an actual wristwatch on. Actually, there's quite a few of them here this morning, wristwatch. You know, it's just been the last 200 years that wristwatches have been popular. Before that, they used sundials and things like that, but they became mechanized and people started wearing wristwatches. Now, there's something that came along that changed wristwatches quite a bit, and what was that? Cell phones, that's right. Now, how many of you use cell phones to keep track of your time? All right, let's see that. Maybe about 50-50 here. I don't know. I mean, it's pretty good, cell phones. Now, they've done a study. Who do you think shows up more punctual? People who use their cell phone to tell time, or people who use a wristwatch? Wristwatch. That's right. The people who wear a wristwatch are known to be more punctual than people who use their cell phone. Now, here's another interesting question. Who do you think looks at the time and sees the time the most? People who use their cell phone or people who use a wristwatch? Wrong. It is cell phone. Every time you pick up your cell phone, what's the first thing that shows up on the screen most of the time? The time. And when you're in an app, what's at the top of the cell phone? The time. The time is there almost all the time. People check their phones somewhere between 90 to 110 times a day. It's hard to believe, but that's what studies show. And so somewhere between 90 and 110 times a day, what do people see? Their time. But it's difference between seeing the time and being conscious of the time. There's a big difference between it. People see the time all the time, but they're not conscious of the time. You know, in this world, as we look, the time is going by, isn't it? The time is going by. People see the time, but there's a difference between seeing the time and being conscious of the time. Being conscious of the time in which we live. And as I look, I don't know about you, but my hair is starting to go gray. I'm getting a little bit older. In fact, I'm at the age when I used to think people were old, but it's changed. My view on that has changed. But as I get older, you notice something about your watch and your clock and it starts speeding up. You ever notice? A couple of years, mine's just going to be spinning. I mean, it's unbelievable how quickly time seems to go by the older I get. And why is that? Because as you get closer, you start to realize the set measure of your time. And you realize there's only so much time probably left for you here. When you start out as a child, you think time is going to go on forever and ever. And so you're not conscious. But as you get closer to the end, time seems to speed up. It works spiritually that way as well, in the spiritual things of God. As we get closer and closer to the end of time, the events that point towards Jesus coming, what are they going to do? They're going to come faster and faster and faster as they point towards that day. But this day I want to talk to you about it is time. It is time. In fact, I want to cover 4 or 5, depending on how long my time lasts here this morning, things that I believe it is time for right now. The first thing I want to talk about, it is time to choose Jesus. It is time to choose Jesus. As I look around in this world, if there was ever a time to choose Jesus, it is now. It is time to be serious about the things of God. In his book, Batterson, the book's called All In, which is a fantastic book, but he makes this quote, and it's interesting. He says, most people in most churches think they are following Jesus. Would you agree with that? Most people in most churches think they are following Jesus. Then he follows up and says, but I am not sure. He says they may think they are following Jesus, But the reality is this. They have invited Jesus to follow them. Now, is there a difference between the two? Following Jesus and asking Jesus to follow you. You know, a lot of ways we want Jesus to be like our mother was when we were young. She followed by and she picked up everything that we dropped. She took care of all of our needs. She was always there. And that's what we want out of God. We want God to be the mother that follows us. Lord, I'm having problems now. Come on, your turn. Pick it up, pick it up. And we're thankful for God that He's following us, and God does follow us. But that's not all. The decision that we have to make, and we need to make today, is I have decided to follow Jesus. I have made up my mind that if things go, I'm going to follow Him. It doesn't matter what happens. If things fall down, if my life falls apart, if everything seems to go wrong, I have decided to follow Jesus. Today's the day to make that decision in our hearts. You know, we aren't guaranteed. Time is a strange thing. We all have the same amount of time every week, but we don't all have the same guaranteed amount of time, do we? I mentioned my friend that's being buried this afternoon. We wouldn't have thought that would have happened, but it did. Time is a limited quantity for us here on this earth. I remember one time when I was visiting a gentleman, we were canvassing. It was up in Lexington, Kentucky. And we went there. He owned a dry cleaning business, and we canvassed him at the dry cleaning business. And we showed him our materials, and he actually started talking about his spiritual life, whether I should decide for Jesus or not for Jesus. And we took a long time, and I appealed to that gentleman. Make your decision today to follow Jesus. We left him a Steps to Christ. The next morning in the newspaper, there'd been a drug deal went bad in his parking lot. Shots were fired. He had nothing to do with it. But he died. He died. Today's the day to decide for Jesus. Today's the day to decide for Jesus. We're not guaranteed tomorrow, but we are guaranteed if we choose Jesus today, we will have a tomorrow. We will have a tomorrow. And so today is the day to follow Jesus. Not just to follow Him in a casual way, but say, I'm going to follow you. Wherever you lead me, whatever you say. I speak what I refer to as Tarzan Spanish. It's kind of, yo, Tim, you... But I have a friend, he's a pastor. He's not a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, lives in Colombia, South America. And we communicate. He wants to practice his English with me. And sometimes we get very unusual communications because he takes the Spanish and literally transfers it into English. And the other day he said, I was possessed in church. And I thought, that doesn't sound good. He said, I was possessed in church. And I wrote him back and said, you know, when we say that in English, usually possessed is not a positive connotation. Usually the devil gets you. And he wrote me back and he said, oh no. He said, down here, it's when you become the pastor of a new church. The church possesses you. It's a ceremony of possession. And he said, I was possessed in church. And I thought, well, why not? Why not? Why shouldn't we be possessed by the church and by God when we come to church? We have decided to follow Jesus. We have decided to follow Him fully. And I would like to say, Christ possessed me. I would like to say, I possess Christ in my life. And my friend, he was right. He was possessed in church, but he was possessed with the right thing. He was possessed with Jesus. But I believe that today is the day to decide for Jesus. Not to look to the things before us, not to look to the things behind us. As the song says, no turning back, no turning back. The cross is before me. The world is behind me. It's not in my vision zone. It's not what I'm looking at today. The world is behind me. And I have decided to follow Jesus. The story was told of David Livingstone, who was over in Africa, and he had fought his way through the jungle and had his little outpost, and they delivered a message to him. And it said, we have some missionary students that are anxious to follow you. Have you prepared the road to where you are? And he wrote them back. And he said, I'm not interested in students when I have to prepare the road. He said, I'm interested in students who want to come when there is no road. And that's the way Jesus, he wants people that will follow him wherever he goes, whether the road is clear, whether the road is not. And today is the day to decide for Jesus. The second thing is, today is the day to spend time with Jesus. And I want to share a testimony of my own. It's not really one that I like to share, but I've been, as mentioned, in the ministry for 40 years. There was a time in the middle of my ministry when I went through a desert zone in my spiritual life. Have any of you ever had a desert zone when things just seemed to dry up and not quite what they were when you first started out? I went through a desert zone in my ministry. The interesting thing is that if people had looked at me, they would have thought I was on the very peak of my spiritual experience. The district that I was in charge of was the top district in the whole union. In fact, it was the top district in North America. At that time, everything seemed to look all right from the outside, but the problem, I knew things weren't right on the inside. And as I analyzed my own life, I decided either I need to change the things or I need to change my job. You can't continue to do what you're doing unless the fire is on the inside. And I decided I have to do something to change my experience. And so I started analyzing my life of what needed to change. And I decided my problem was that I needed to spend more time with Jesus. You know, it's easy to get busy doing God's work, but not spend time with God. It's easy to be distracted by good things and not spend time with Jesus. And I determined in my life that I liked Jesus, but I wasn't positive at that time that I loved Jesus. I liked him well enough to want him as a friend. I wanted him to be the mother that followed along behind me, but I wasn't totally positive that I completely loved Jesus. And so I prayed to the Lord, Lord, help things change in my life. And the answer was, spend more time with me. Spend more time with me. If you want to love somebody, what do you have to do? You spend time. You spend time with me. And now my schedule was full. I mean, I left every morning, 9 o'clock in the morning. Many times I didn't get home until 11, 12 o'clock at night. And so I decided, what are you going to do to change your life? And I made a decision that if Jesus was the most important thing, Jesus had to be the most important thing in my life. And I was sorry to say that I discovered there was a lot of things I loved more than Jesus. We talked about one of them. We raised it up in the air. I love my cell phone more than I love Jesus. I determined that in my life. You know why I knew that? What was the first thing I looked at every morning? I leapt out of my bed, I went into my easy chair, I sat back and I started checking my messages to see what would happen. Because I was more interested in what happened in my messages than I was about my meeting with Jesus. And I looked at the other things in my life, and there was a list of things, I'm sorry to say, that I determined that I loved more than I loved Jesus. And I decided if I was going to love Jesus more, I had to make a decision about those things. And I can't say that I've been perfect with this every day, but I decided the first thing I did in the morning was I was going to meet with Jesus. And I decided, how would I do that with the day I had? And I thought, well, Jesus is going to have to make up the deficit. I started getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. If you want to spend time with somebody, you got to make time in your schedule to do it. And so every morning I rise up out of my chair and go to my chair and I have my date with Jesus. And I can honestly tell you, friends, it has revolutionized my spiritual life. It has changed the way I look at everything spiritually. It's changed the way I pray. You know, I used to pray for things. You ever caught yourself doing that? I used to pray for things to change my spiritual. Lord, I need more patience. I need more love. I need more. And I'd go through all this list. And as I came to know Jesus, I realized that I was praying for the wrong thing. And I started praying, Jesus, I need more of you. You know, if you have Jesus, you have love, you have patience, you have all those things are wrong. You can be a patient person at times without Jesus. I've seen people go through all kinds of stuff. I didn't need patience. I needed Jesus. I needed Jesus to only come into my life and revolutionize my life for Him. And I think this morning what we need, and we need so very much, is that we need to spend that time with Jesus. You know, I often think if I could come, it's an interesting question I've asked myself, if I could guarantee, if I came here and had cards that I could pass out, and it said one guaranteed answer to prayer, what would you choose as your prayer? You ever thought about that? What you'd choose as your prayer? Maybe it's that gimpy leg that's been bothering you for the last few years. Maybe you'd pray to have it fixed. Maybe it'd be a relationship in your life. Maybe it'd be your mortgage payment disappear. I don't know. But what would you choose? You know, David gives us clarity in the answer to that back in the book of Psalms. In Psalms chapter 27, he tells us what his decision was. Psalms 27 verse 4, he says it very clearly. He says one thing. You know, if you could just choose one thing to have answered. Well, David says, one thing I have desired of the Lord. That one thing will I seek after. And what did he desire? He says that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord. What is the one thing that's most important? What did David know? That the one thing that he needed the most was to be in the presence of Jesus. And I pray that that will always be my time, my prayer in my life. But I believe now, that with all the problems in this world, that now is the time to spend time with Jesus. The third thing, I believe now is the time to stand up. Stand up for what we believe as Seventh-day Adventists. You know, sometimes we tend to be a little bashful about what we believe. We're excited about a lot of things, but when it comes to religion, we're a little bashful. I worked up in Minnesota for one summer. If you live in Minnesota, you'll discover that they like hockey. I mean, if you don't know that, that's true. They like hockey. And I used to go with some church members there, and they were quiet as church mouse in church, but I noticed a distinct difference when they were in the hockey field. I saw people that wouldn't say amen stand up on their seats in the hockey stadium. Their veins were sticking out on the side of their neck. I mean, they were yelling, but you ask them to go to the next door neighbor and tell them Jesus loves you. Oh, I couldn't do that. I'm a bashful person. You're a bashful person. I mean, you're standing on your chair, yelling and screaming. How is that? But many times we're more excited about the things of the world than we are about the most important thing in the world. And it's time we stand up and get excited about what we believe in. We have the most important thing that the world needs. We have the only answer to all problems out there. I am so sick of politics. This time, it is incredible. My phone rings, I bet 10 times a day with some recording that went off for the last, I don't know how long. I am sick of it. Absolutely sick of all of those calls that come there. But I don't care what they tell me on the phone. I don't care who you believe or who you voted for. They haven't got the answer. They don't have the answer to the problems that we have. If you believe that, you are mistaken. I'm here to tell you. They do not have the answer. There's only one answer, and what is that answer? That's Jesus Christ. We get excited sometimes about the politicians. We ought to be excited about the one that really has the answer. We ought to get excited about Jesus and what Jesus can do in other people's lives. My good friend Bill Beckworth, he's a retired publishing director of the Southern Union, told a story years ago that impacted my life. He said when he was young, he was part of the Army Reserve. And he said he would go in on the weekends to do his stint there with the Army Reserve and his education. And he said sometimes he would go in, and he had just recently accepted Jesus and the message in his life. And he said he'd go in there sometimes and they wouldn't have anything to do. And he said often, this was years ago, he said they'd get a record of a comedian and they'd have them all sit down and they'd play that for 30 minutes until their time was up. He said the problem was it was the most foul-mouthed, horrible stuff he had ever heard. And all the guys would sit down and laugh at it and different things. He said he sat there and he thought, oh, I can't get up. He said, I need to get up, but I can't get up. And as he listened to it a little longer, he said, I finally made up my mind. He said, as a Christian, I will not listen to this any longer. And he said he stood up and he walked out of the room. And he said to his amazement, when he stood up, 5 other people stood up and followed him out. And every one of them said, we were waiting for a person to stand. You know, that's the way it is. It's time we stand up for what we believe. It's time we stand up for what we know is the best message in the world. And when we stand up, invariably, somebody will follow. Somebody's waiting for your example as to what you believe, your example of what God has to share. And so I believe today, as Romans says, we need to declare, I am not ashamed. I am not ashamed of what Jesus has done. Now's my time to stand up for what Jesus has done for me. And so I believe we ought to stand up. I also believe it's the time to share. It's the time to go out and give our message to the world. When I was young, we used to play a game. We called the switching game. And when that switching game, we would imagine, what if we could shift positions with one person in the world for one day? What would we do? Of course, we always pick the rich ones, you know, as far as that. Well, I'd like to switch with Bill Gates just for a day. His checkbook would get a workover during that 24-hour period. And we'd ponder. Sometimes we'd say, oh, maybe I'd like to be president today. But I don't know why anybody would really want that. But it sounded pretty impressive when you were 11 years old. But the more I see it, the more I doubt it. But we would imagine, what would it be like? What would we do if we could switch positions with one person in the world for one day? You know what's interesting? If we could play that game, what if you had to switch positions with the drunkard in the street? What if you had to switch positions with the drug addict? What if you had to switch positions with the person whose marriage had gone wrong? What if you had to switch positions with somebody whose life was totally falling to pieces? If that was your case for one day, and they were in your house living the Christian life, and you were in their position living their life, and you could see the big picture of things, what would you hope they did during that one day? What would you hope they did? I would hope they would come to my house and bring me hope. I would hope that somehow their heart would be touched with Jesus and said, that person needs help, and I have a message to take to them. I have a message to take to them. Friends, we're blessed to be in the position that we are. You're blessed to be here in church today and know about Jesus. But there's lots of people out there who, if they could know, would love for you to come. They want you to come. They want you to take and change that position in your mind and say, they need help. I can bring them help. I can take the message of hope to their life, and through Jesus, their lives can be transformed. You know, when Jesus takes a hold of your life, your comfort zone ends. Jesus, if you follow Jesus, you will always be at the edge of your comfort zone. If you really follow Jesus, you will be asked to do things where you say, oh, not me, Lord, not me. Maybe the brother over there, but oh, not me, Lord. But then as you continue, what have we decided to do? We have decided to follow Jesus. And if Jesus says do it, what happens? You do it. And if Jesus is in front of you, it will be done. It will be done. But Jesus is calling on people just like you to change their comfort zone. To change their comfort zone. Maybe God's calling you to do something different in your life. Maybe He's going to lay a call on you to be a missionary someday. Maybe He's going to call on you to be a literature evangelist somewhere in the state of Georgia. Maybe He's going to call on you to do something different, to push you beyond your comfort zone, to see if the decision is real. Have you decided to follow Jesus? Have you decided when that voice comes that, yes, Lord, I'm going to follow you? Are you going to look back to see if he's picking up the pieces of your decision? The Lord is going to lay upon every heart. I believe the closer we get to the end, the more Jesus is going to stretch our comfort zone for the kingdom of God. The next one is not something that I believe it is time, but I believe it is almost time. Almost time. It's almost time for Jesus to come. It's almost time for Jesus to come. And what do we have to do that? To be ready to meet him on that day? We've listed it, haven't we? We have to decide to follow Jesus. We have to be willing to commit all to Jesus. We have to be willing to not be ashamed of Jesus. We have to be willing to share others with Jesus. And as we do that, God is going to open up miraculous things in our life. I'll have to say, in my experience in literature evangelist, there's no way I could not believe in God. Almost. I have seen him work so many times. I've seen him reach so many people that were hungry for the kingdom of God. And I've just come to believe that we serve an incredible God. I remember one experience that talks about the coming of Jesus. I was canvassing in Montgomery, Alabama. I was following up on a little card. It was obvious it was sent in by a child. You could tell by the handwriting. It was real poor handwriting, half filled in. And I got to the home. I still remember the name. It was Mrs. Johnson. And when I knocked on the door, she came, she looked at that card, and her response was classic. She said, I'm going to kill that kid. and I looked at her and said, Mrs. Johnson, don't you think that'd be a little radical? She just sent a card asking about the Bible, and she kind of laughed, and she invited me into her home. And when I went in, we sat down, and I could tell the only reason she invited me in was because there was nothing good on TV. Because she had no more interest in the Bible than anything. She flat out told me she did. And she said, I don't believe all that stuff. She said, no, my daughter does. She said, she goes to church every week. She said, she loves Jesus. She walks down to the church, goes by herself. And she said, I don't have much use for that kind of stuff. But I pressed on with my presentation. It was beautiful blue Bible storybooks, which are marvelous, marvelous books. But as I told her about the books. At the end of every one of my presentations, there's two beautiful pictures in that set, and it shows the coming of Jesus. And one of them shows the wicked. It shows how they're looking up and they're crying for the rocks and the mountains to fall on them. The other picture shows the saved. It shows them with their hands raised, and the text says they're crying out, this is my God. He will save me. And as I showed them to her, I said, Mrs. Johnson, the Bible tells us there's only going to be two groups when Jesus comes back on this day. There'll be those that are ready, and there'll be those that aren't. And I was talking just to finish my canvas, really. And to my amazement, when I looked up and saw Mrs. Johnson, there was tears running down both sides of her face. And she said, this is incredible. And I said, what's that? She said, just this week, it was just 2 days before, she said, my little girl came home. She went to Wednesday night. Now that's faithful. Wednesday night to the prayer meeting. And she came home and she said she walked in the house with tears on her face. And she said, Mommy, Jesus is coming back. And I want you to be ready. I want you to be ready. And Mrs. Johnson looked up at me and she said, but I'm not ready. I'm not ready. But you know, we have good news, don't we? We have good news. And I was glad to be able to look at her and say, you may not be, but you can be. You can be. And we took just about 10 minutes and we told the beautiful gospel story. You know, and I had the privilege of kneeling down before a couch with Mrs. Johnson as she invited Jesus into her heart. And when she got up, she said, my daughter won't believe this in a million years. In a million years. But I believe Jesus is coming back. Don't you believe that? I believe Jesus is coming back. And I believe it's time. I believe it's time to be ready to meet him. I want to be ready on that day. Don't you? Let's make our decision today.
Thanks for watching. If you're blessed by that message, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of them. We try to post every Saturday at 6 o'clock. Also, hit that like button, comment below, share with your friends. We try to read the comments and reply as possible, and may God bless you.